My name is Joyce Whitney. I am just the moderator here, but I am so pleased that you're joining us today for cyberbullying and tweens. And we're going to talk about how to keep tweens safe. So it's a super important topic, as I'm sure you'll agree with me. So today it's my pleasure to introduce to you our two speakers of the day. We've got Carrie Rogers Whitehead. She is the founder and CEO of Digital Respons-Ability. It's a professional development company that really focuses on helping educators learn about insights on research and strategies. They've got professional development for that actually gets delivered to students and ideas for teachers as well. It's literally written the book on this, okay? Actually several books. So they're available on Amazon and so forth, and we'll be putting some of the links to that into the chat in case you're interested in some summer reading. Digital Citizenship, Teaching Strategies, Becoming a Digital Parent. And the newest book is still available on pre-order, right, Carrie? It's just pre-order right now?
3rd.
Oh, August 3rd. That's close. It's pretty close. 3 M's of Fearless Digital Parenting. So, these three books would be great summer reading, or even, great book club focus for teachers and parents, just saying. But along with Carrie, you're in for a treat. Dr. Justin Patchin is with us, and he's a professor at University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, where it's nice and cool, moderate weather, not too hot, not too cold, just kind of, Cinderella, just kind of perfect. Or is that Sleeping Beauty? I don't know. Never get it right. Justin has been studying how people use and misuse technology since 2001. That's a long time. So he's going to share that information from his wealth of information as well as his 2020 study. He currently co-directs the Cyberbullying Research Center, and you can learn more about him at justinpatchin.com or cyberbullying.org. And I just posted that in the chat because I knew we'd want to put that there. So now you know who's going to be speaking today. How about you tell us a little bit about you? Here's our first poll of the day. What role do you have in your organization? A school administrator, a teacher, school counselor, library media specialist, or something else? If it's something else, put it in the chat. And we're interested in finding out so we can make sure that we're helping and addressing this accordingly. So we've got educational consultant, another teacher, a public librarian. Yay, thank you for your work. Library media specialist, teacher trainers, parapro. All right, teacher, parent educator. All right, love it. Keep it coming. I'm going to close it out and say to the team, guess what? You've got about 37% teachers, about 40% other, and a nice array of folks here. Thank you all so much for your response. This is some of the things that we're going to cover today, and I know when my kids were tweens, I talked with just about everybody I could find about when was the right time for them to get their first phone, what age, and of course my kids were pushing me in one direction and I was holding my ground. But, those first phones, those first social media accounts, that's really a test of character and time. And when are they going to be ready for that? So if you were asking yourself the same questions that I did once upon a time when my girls were younger, you're not alone. And so most people are going to even agree that after this past year of remote learning, the access to devices and online has just accelerated and sometimes feels like it's out of your control. I heard it called the other day the new Wild Wild West. So Carrie, maybe keep that. Maybe that's another name for a new book. So the big question is, how do we keep students safe and in this changing world that's going so fast? And we're going to address that in a moment. But before we do so, let me ask you one more question. Do you or have you seen cyberbullying with tweens at your job? Whoa. Whoa, this is off the scale. Boom. Only if the no's are now chiming in. Yeah, they didn't built it out there. See what happens? All right. I think we've got a majority. Let's post it that way. We're going 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we've got a majority of folks, almost 70%, that are saying yeah. So, okay, you're in the right place. I hope we can help answer that. Please feel free to put your questions in either the chat or under the question mark. We've got people who are manning that, and at the end, when we're ready for questions, I'll be funneling those back to Justin and Carrie. For the time being, I'm going to take myself off of the monitor and off of the audio and hand it on over to Carrie. Here we go.
No, thank you, Joyce. And this is a real personal webinar for me because I have a tween myself, and I'm going to start off talking a little bit about these developmental stage of tweens. Maybe this is a time of your life that you've maybe repressed or tried to forget. I know that I shot up, hair, all of it. I was very, very tall, was teased. You remember these things at these ages. So there's a lot going on at these ages. And so I wanted to talk about these developmental stages because that gives us more context for some of what they're dealing with online and how they react and how they think about this. But I don't know if we have other parents of tweens out there. Feel free to chime in as well. But you're experiencing this real time. This is a huge, big change in a developmental stage, and they're dealing with a lot. And you add the technology on top of it. Lots of stuff they're going through right now. The changes in puberty, the summer too, increased sweating. You have body odors and acne. I have to confess, when I was a tween, I would just spray a bunch of sun-ripened raspberry there from Bath and Body Works and thought I was good. When we actually, you don't always know. These things happen really quickly, and you're not always taught or aware of how your body is shifting and changing. And I cringe a little bit thinking about, wow, I was really covering up with some stuff going on there too. So you have acne, growth spurts, breast development, all the sexual development, and emotionally, there's a lot of changes as well. So the hormones are increasing in our bodies. We're reacting to things maybe stronger than we used to be. We're feeling these intense changes in our body. It can be confusing, can be stressful, it can be exciting as well. We've got some people weighing in there with all the things that you're experiencing, but you probably remember this as well. It kind of stays in your memory. And these kids are going through these changes. Their bodies are pushing towards adulthood. They're pushing you out of the house. And this is hard because that physical maturation happens before the emotional maturation. And so there's a disconnect between where their bodies are and where their brains are. So they might have these mixed messages. They might feel like they can do more, they can understand more. Their bodies are pushing them in a direction that they maybe are not exactly ready for. And they have this rejection, which is normal, of caregivers and embrace of their peers. So when you add that peer influence, and I wanted to get to the bottom of this is a big point I want to make as this relates to technology, is they have a huge amount of peer influence that increases around these age. I see it already with my kiddo, like, we're best buddies. And all of a sudden there's a little bit of like, you stay over there, maybe rolling of the eyes. There's a distancing. There's like I'm suddenly not cool anymore. I used to be much more cooler, Justin. I don't know about you, but it's normal. And I have to remind myself of this. I don't know if you've experienced, you have some kids too, Justin. Have you experienced some of this?
I've never been cool, if that's what you're asking, but I do have a tween. So yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yes, there's prime place as a parent, and then suddenly, like you're toppled off your throne a little bit there, and we're close. We're still close, but you notice that distancing, and I have to remind myself that is normal, because it can be hard on a parent, because you feel rejected. You might feel like you want to be more included. You love them. You care about them. You had maybe common hobbies and things you did together, and those hobbies have shifted. So you do have to remind yourself, and then you have to remember that their peers are becoming on the top of the throne now. They're becoming where they listen to, they follow, they want to be like, they're watching. And this is a high prime time. So if you are familiar working with middle schoolers versus high schoolers, and I work with both groups, big difference between like a 7th grader and even a 10th and 11th grader. The time they get in like the upper high school, they're more sure of their identity. They're less influenced by peers. They're all of that. I can tell you a story. One time I was teaching digital citizenship with a 7th grade class. classroom. And we were doing an activity with like Post-its and talking about emotions and how technology makes us feel. And so one kid put up like a silly word. And guess what? 20 kids put up the same exact word and thought it was the most hilarious thing. They are following and they're watching. It's hard to have a discussion at that point, what their peers do. And they follow and watch what their peers do online. And Justin and I are going to be talking about that more. But think about this is prime peer influence age. They actually get better and more in high school. And this influence and these developments happen really unevenly. And this is what is difficult for educators. You have a wide range of digital literacy skills and maybe like a fourth or fifth grade classroom. You might have a fifth grader who has had very little access, like they don't have a phone, they don't have an iPad, they have more stringent rules at home. And you might also have a fifth grader who's had a phone for 2 years, has multiple accounts, social media accounts at the same age. So this is harder to teach because they have these different digital literacy skills. They have different digital citizenship skills. They have different rules and norms at home. We're going to be talking more about those norms, but it is harder for educators to generalize. Now, once they start getting a little bit older, this kind of equalizes out a little bit more, but both that physical, mental, and technology development does not happen evenly. And in particular, this with the physical development, it affects girls differently. Girls typically hit puberty soon. There's also more shame around when girls are experiencing these body changes. So I mentioned being teased a little bit. Part of that is because I grew up faster. I was taller. I had more hair in my legs. And I remember the girls teasing me about the hair in my legs. And I just wanted to fall into a hole and die. You just want to die at that point when you're about in fifth grade and you have girls teasing you that way. So as opposed to boys where some of that height, those physical changes is like, oh yeah, you're a cool dude here. Look at him. Look how big he is. Look how strong he is. They experience puberty different from, their male peers. And so this is something to keep in mind, especially when we talk about technology, is that girls feel differently about their bodies, about their body image. They're maybe more aware of how their bodies are different or even bullied around how their bodies are different. Their moods can vary more. And you also have kind of a quieter, and maybe some of our educators have experienced this, the girls and the boys are equally talkative, and then the girls started getting a little quieter around this tweens age. They're more aware, they ruminate more, they might not speak up as more. So these puberty times, these developmental stages are something that educators should be more aware of, being careful about calling on people, disciplining on people, talking about people, how their behavior management is done in a classroom because they care so much about their behavior. So I know that we have a lot of librarians in here. I was a public librarian at teen services, youth services for years and years. And I had to be really careful in the library when I would discipline the teens. And I would try to take them one-on-one to talk to instead of in a group. I remember one time I made the mistake of asking someone because they had violated some policies in the library by shouting and things like that, and I had to ask them to leave for the day, and I did it in front of their peers. They're all sitting at a booth together, and I might as well just awarded that kid $1 million. He was like excited. He's like, yeah, look at how cool I am. I got kicked out. But what I intended as a consequence with some behavior management turned into an incentive because they care so much about their peers and looking cool. When I did that in front of his peers, it wasn't perceived the same way. So we have to be careful as parents, as educators, when we talk about behaviors and how they are because they want to look a certain way. And by defying the uncool adult, that's a really good way to look cool there too. So being careful about how we talk about these things. If we might backfire if we're trying to talk about technology. You shouldn't do that. Well, maybe you made that kid look really cool in front of his peers there too. So I'd love to hear, and chime in there. I'm going to summarize some of what does this mean for caregivers, and then I'll ask Joyce what she thinks before Justin dives in with some of the research. And if you want to chime in as well, Justin, maybe you were never cool, but I remember being cool. But about discipline and how we talk to our tweens and how we manage some of that behavior. If you want to chime in, I like to say be the mean parent and be the scapegoat sometimes, recognizing that they need a place to save face, and it's very hard for them to stand up to their friends. To us, it's like, why do you care what they think? Well, it doesn't matter. You're older, you care less about what people think, and we forget how much they care about what their peers think. And if we are putting them in a spot where they have to tattle or they have to choose between or make these difficult decisions, it's very difficult. So if you want to add anything, Justin, I think that there's some great comments here as well, Joyce, if you want to add before we kind of move on to our next section. We'll get our context of where they are developmentally. Joyce,
I'll add one thing. I'll add one really quick thing, and that was I used to tell my husband, who was a middle school teacher, I say, don't react to the first thing you hear. Mm-hmm. So that when I would get these questions like, I want to go with Emily to go to the mall right now, and it was 9 p.m. on a school night, my husband wanted to hit the ceiling. Are you kidding? You're not doing that. I just said, what does Emily's mom say? Well, I don't know. She's asking her now. Okay, you come back and you let me know when then she'd come back. She says, Emily's mom said no. I said, oh, okay, too bad.
We jump to conclusions.
Yes, exactly.
This is hard too when it comes to cyberbullying and some of those online safety issues, that they might not be coming to you with as many of their problems. You might be much more aware of who their friends are and their feelings are, but as they distance themselves from parents, that includes that distancing with what happens with technology as well. So that means extra watching, extra being aware, because you're not necessarily their best friend. You're not the cool one anymore, and they might not be bringing things to you that they might have before. So other things on here is being careful about shaming behavior or talking about them online. This is a big pet peeve of mine, Justin. I don't know if you've seen it. I hate when parents complain about their kids online. It just sets a horrible example. And for tweens in particular, where they're very hyper aware of their image and look, that's it's very damaging to that relationship too. So being very careful of what you say. Since my kid had hit preschool age, I ask him whenever I post a picture or talk about him. He's approved the book anecdotes, but I try to be careful about asking permission too at this age, particularly at this age. A little bit more leading into what Justin was going to say, we have found, and Justin's going to share his own research, we have found with Digital Respons-Ability, we survey how tweens use media, and consistently for years, YouTube has been the most popular social media with the group that we work with. Now, part of this is because the younger people have more of that TV consumption. They watch more, and then it decreases, and then they get mobile phones, and that shifts how they consume media. But yeah, YouTube consistently, and YouTube is usually one of our top 3, depending on the specific elementary age we survey, as the most popular social media with that group too. So I'd love to hear what you have to say, Justin, on what you find with the media. There is a shifting going on with their bodies, with their emotions, with their tech use, their digital literacy, but also that media consumption.
Well, it's the perfect storm, isn't it? When you talk about adolescence and development and technology and even just the brain changes, and adolescents by their very nature are risk takers and are short-sighted, and these things don't mix well with technology and ease of access to others. So I'm going to touch base a little bit on some of the research we did. So by day, I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, but I've been studying how young people use and misuse technology since about 2000, with a specific focus on cyberbullying, but also social networking and sexting and sextortion and really all the problems that young people can get into. And I have a tween. I have an 11-year-old son. He's currently at summer camp. He's at Boy Scout camp for a week, and this is the first time he's been away from us for a full week. So hopefully he's having fun and not getting into too much trouble with his scout buddies. And my wife of 21 years is a youth services librarian. So I've long been interested in kids. I worked with kids when I was in college. One of my first jobs was working in a residential facility for delinquent youth. I've coached hockey for the last 5 years. I coached Little League. So I love spending time with kids. And the more research I do, the more I can understand their behaviors. But when you're living and breathing it and seeing it, it can still be very frustrating. I remember the first time my son came home from school saying he was bullied at school. It's a lot different when you're doing the research and looking at the numbers versus hearing it from your son's own mouth. But we did a little project last summer with Cartoon Network. So Cartoon Network contacted us early last spring. So I think it was January of 2020 or maybe February. And they had done a project a few years earlier on tween bullying. And they wanted to know what the kind of state of cyberbullying was among tweens. And we've never done research among tweens. All of our research to that point, well, almost all, had focused on middle and high school age students. So 13 to 17-year-olds, 12 to 17-year-olds roughly. And really nobody has done a systematic evaluation of tween behaviors online with respect to cyberbullying. So Common Sense Media has done some stuff on digital media use generally, but nobody has done cyberbullying. So Cartoon Network asked us if we could work with them to do a survey of tweens, and AT&T Foundation funded it. And so we surveyed over 1,000 9 to 12-year-olds, nationally representative sample. And so I'm just going to touch on a little bit of what we found in that research to help provide some context to some of these behaviors and experiences. And as Carrie mentioned, YouTube is the most popular app or site among this population. And not surprisingly, Minecraft, Roblox, TikTok is gaining a lot of popularity among these kids. For context, my son does not have his own phone yet. He does have an old phone of ours that has Wi-Fi access, but he doesn't have a cellular plan, so he's not calling and texting his friends all day long. Although we're getting close, we'll probably end up getting him a usable cell phone in the next several months. It's getting to be about that point. But he likes watching YouTube videos. He likes playing sort of games, local games on his device. He's not into social networking. He's not really a very social kid generally, but he's looking at YouTube videos. He likes looking at products on Amazon, camping products and outdoor survival products and things. He was very excited when he found stormproof matches on Amazon. So he's a Boy Scout. So that's the great thing about technology, is it allows our kids to pursue their interests with more depth, right? And even engage with others who have those similar interests. Now, of course, we need to provide some context and some scaffolding to those explorations, right? I don't want him going on Amazon and ringing up a big bill, right? And I want to make sure the videos he's watching are appropriate on YouTube. And, there are tools that YouTube provides for that. And if it's a particularly young kid, they could use YouTube Kids. But you can see some of the apps here that are very popular among these young people. And so in this study, we asked tweens about their experience with bullying at school. And not surprisingly, about half of these tweens had been bullied at school. Okay. And more than 70% had some connection to bullying at school, whether they saw it, they experienced it, or they did it. And, I think just about everybody here today has an experience with bullying when they were growing up in those tween years. Sort of late elementary, middle school are kind of the worst, I think, for bullying at school. And so we shouldn't be surprised that the bullying moves online as well, as more young people are moving online, using a variety of devices. This is another thing that we learned in the research. The tween years are where kind of smartphone ownership explodes, right? So among 9-year-olds, about 20% of 9-year-olds have their own smartphone. And about 68% of 12-year-olds have their own smartphone. So that's access to everything, right? If they have a smartphone, they have access to all of these things. And therefore, by default, they have access to potential cyberbullying. So about 15% of the tweens had said they've been cyberbullied. About 3% admitted doing it to others, right? And it's hard to, I mean, we're not surprised by these numbers. We don't really have much context. We know these numbers are much higher, not much higher, they're higher for teens. So probably lifetime teens is maybe 35, 40% have been cyberbullied. In the last 30 days, it's maybe 15 to 20%. Okay, so they're a little bit lower than teens, but these tweens are experiencing cyberbullying. It's certainly something that we as parents and educators and others who work with and serve youth need to have conversations with teens about what they're experiencing online and how to confront these behaviors, right? Also not surprising is the overlap between bullying at school and bullying online. It's actually fairly uncommon for a tween or a teen to be just bullied online. Typically, if they're bullied online, they're being bullied at school. Sometimes it's the same kids doing it. Other times it's different kids. But whatever it is, there's almost always that school kind of connection. So as an educator, if you're a teacher or an administrator, if a student comes to you and says they're being cyberbullied, odds are pretty high they're also being bullied at school. So definitely something to look into and dig a little bit deeper on, right? The overlap is definitely there. Okay, so here you can see some of the differences between boys and girls. Pretty similar. The research is a little mixed when it comes to whether boys or girls are bullied or cyberbullied more or less. Some of that depends on how you measure or define bullying and cyberbullying, right? If you're using some more relational forms of aggression and rumor spreading and gossip, it's going to be more the girls. If it's more the physical threats or what we see for boys, bullying in video or online games. So it just varies. The kind of the form varies by the platform and how it's being utilized. But if you use a fairly broad measure of bullying and cyberbullying, you're going to see it's fairly consistent between boys and girls. Okay, and the effects. This is one thing that did interest us. Those who were cyberbullied said it did affect them pretty significantly. So over 2/3 said it affected their feelings about themselves, their friendships about a third, their physical health, so stomach aches, headaches. These are real problems. And when my co-researcher and good friend Samir Hinduja and I first started studying these things in 2000 and 2001, we ran into a lot of adults who didn't understand this because, as Carrie mentioned earlier, our adult brain can see a hurtful comment online and just kind of ignore it and not be too impacted by it. But the kid brain is really impacted by anything that's said, and it just affects them more deeply because the peer approval is so important for them at that age. So I think, what I like to tell adults is if a child is coming to you and talking about an experience with bullying or cyberbullying, maybe in the back of your mind, you're saying, what's the big deal? It's just a message in a game and just ignore it. Well, if they're coming to you, it's a big deal to them because they don't typically come to adults when they're being bullied or cyberbullied. So if it gets to that point, it's a big deal and it's affecting them. And so that's where you need to take some action. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, so it's definitely affecting them. The other thing is we asked the tweens to tell us what worked to stop the cyberbullying. And there were some technical tools like blocking or reporting or muting, but there were some kind of social tools too, in telling a parent and reporting to the school. Telling a parent was kind of interesting because almost half of the tweens who were cyberbullied said telling their parent helped to get it to stop. That's a lot higher than in our teen research where it's maybe 25%. So that just reinforces the idea that in the tween age, parents are still an important piece of the puzzle, an important part of your child's development. Because as those of you who have older kids or who have kids that are maybe grown know, at some point they're going to stop confiding in you as a parent. And childhood, they really focus on the parent. In the tween years, it's starting to evolve from parent to peer and other influences. You need to take advantage of that while you can. And how you respond to some of these developmental challenges and social challenges in the tween years can help set the stage for whether they'll come to you as a teen. And look, we shouldn't be solving all of their problems for them, but we should be there for support. particularly if it gets to the point where they don't have the tools. And that's most of the time in the tween years, they don't fully have those tools, whether they're social, emotional tools to get them to stop. Another thing we asked about in this study, which I thought was really important, was helping behaviors, whether or not they'd helped when they saw bullying or cyberbullying. And you can see that 2/3 of the tweens said they had helped in one way or another. And we dug into that a little bit and asked what some of the barriers to helping were. And they were, if they saw bullying and didn't help, it was because they were afraid they were going to make it worse. They didn't know what to do. They were afraid they were going to get targeted. They didn't know who to tell. So giving your kids, your students, suggestions, a toolkit for how to respond when they are experiencing bullying or cyberbullying, or when they see it, is very useful. And practicing those things with them. So, if you find yourself in a situation where you see bullying at school, who are you going to tell? What are you going to tell them? What are you going to do for the person that you saw being bullied? So doing some scenarios and walking them through some of this stuff is very valuable at this age. I'll stop there in terms of the research. We've got a full 70-page report, and definitely happy to answer more questions about the research at the end, or how to help mitigate these problems in the tween years. But other than that, I'll throw it back to Carrie for now.
Yeah, and I love your input as we go through this next section when we're talking about what we can do about cyberbullying. And I'm following in the chat, and there's some great suggestions. I know there's some questions in that chat, and after this section, we'll move into those questions as we kind of wrap up today. So I'm loving the suggestions. Please chat and add, what if your experience is, what can we do? This is, as Dr. Patchin was saying, this is a big issue that is affecting a lot of our tweens. And I was interested in that statistic of only about half of them talk to their parents about it. So we can't assume, your best buddy one day is kind of moving on, and they might not tell you. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a reflection on you as a parent or that you've done anything. It's just kind of where they're at. So we have to kind of watch and see what's going on, because they're not necessarily telling us what's going to be happening. So let's talk about some of those suggestions. When I always use the word digital citizenship, we got people who know about that as well. The ethical and responsible use of technology is addressing the whole person and recognizing that this happens in an environment. And yes, there's some individual risk factors that we should focus on and what's happening with that individual. Maybe they've gone through a friend breakup. Maybe there's been a divorce. Maybe they've moved. There's a lot that can be going on. But all of these things happen not in a vacuum. And this is where we need to monitor kids, that there might be something else going on in their lives. They're at a higher risk for the cyberbullying. If they've moved to a new school, they're higher risk if they've dealt with some of this. So making sure we're watching those kids as they're dealing with these life events, and knowing that we got to address this whole person and everything that's going on there. So let's talk about those protective factors. Some of those risk factors can be like, mental illness. A lot of the cyberbullying, as Dr. Patchin knows, is like through breakups and friend breakups and romantic breakups and those fighting and with friendships or people they know. So that can be a risk factor. Kids going through a lot of that. But protective factors, this term is self-oriented personal competencies. So being able to self-regulate, having that self-efficacy, that degree of confidence in their own ability, being able to identify their feelings and how they're reacting, and being able to just kind of know how they feel, how they're reacting, and kind of step back from those emotions, or some of those self-oriented personal competencies. So that's some of the strongest protective factors. And that's something that we as educators can help build. I like some of the suggestions, like earlier role playing, thinking through things, working on those SEL skills. That can all help with those self-oriented personal competencies there too. And positive peer interaction. This is where it can be trickier. If there are friendships or moving or changes or all of this going on there, positive peer interaction is a huge protective factor. I like that research you were sharing about how many kids intervened and got involved because when they saw that their peers and their friends were being bullied as well. So maybe encouraging some of that, rewarding some of that, going through those questions and role playing of what would you do can help with increase those positive peer interactions. And of course, a protective factor is simply less access to tech. This is one reason after school programs have a lot of great protective factors in them. They're busier. They're not just idle. I know that a lot of the issues of online safety, cyberbullying that happened when I was a librarian, just because they were bored and they were there for hours and hours every day after school with nothing else to do. So they start poking at each other. They start messing with each other. They start getting into these things because they just have so much access and not that supervision too. So these are some of the protective factors with cyberbullying. And with those, we can build these skills, that empathy of understanding how our actions affect others. And this can also be done through some of that role playing, talking through things, understanding of healthy relationships. I know it sounds young, but they are already starting the some of them dating relationships at this age. They're these new kind of boyfriend, girlfriend, some of that starts happening. And it seems young, but it does start happening at this age. And they might not have models for what that healthy relationship looks like. And that's kind of a bit of a wild west on that. How much do you text a person you're dating? When do you stop? What do you need to do? How do you have to friend them here? Do you have to say this on this platform that you're dating? What does this all look like? Adults are trying to figure out some of these rules for dating online, and so are young people. And so telling them that, hey, if this person is texting you this much or saying that you have to send this or doing this, that is part of those understanding of healthy relationships. And I know that sometimes like, wow, 11 and 12 seems too young, but it's not too young. They'll often start pairing off at those ages. And if we're waiting until they're like 16, 17 to talk about some of those relationships, they might already be getting into some of that over a period of time there too. So social skills, coping skills, and then sleep is huge. This is when they're, as well as all the hormones are going on in their bodies and changes, their circadian rhythm starts shifting. It starts getting later. They start kind of needing more sleep as their bodies are growing. And that lack of sleep is a big risk factor for lack of self-regulation, a whole bunch of physical and emotional issues that can kind of exacerbate some of the cyberbullying. When you're tired, you're not going to have the ability to step back and say, should I say this? Should I post it? How am I going to react to this when you're sleep deprived? Justin, what do you want to add on some of the skills or some of the thoughts on these strategies?
Yeah, I think and the other kind of related to what you're saying, I was trying to get caught up on some of the chat questions here, is the balance, right? And so I think parents are concerned, rightfully so, about screen time and how much time their kids are spending online and watching YouTube videos and chatting with their friends. But exactly what you talked about, are they getting enough sleep? Are they getting enough physical activity? Are they getting their house responsibilities done? So then, if they're playing an online game with friends, fine. It's fine. I mean, I grew up spending hours and hours playing Mario and Zelda and Metroid, and I turned out mostly okay. But you have to balance it. And so I'm not as concerned as a parent and a researcher about screen time per se. I'm interested in the quality of the screen time. Is it interactive? Is it educational? Is it fun? Is it safe? Is it, who are the young people interacting with? Who's my child interacting with? And, can they be trusted? So I think looking at the broad parenting picture is really important instead of getting so focused on, I won't let my kids go on screens for more than 30 minutes a day. Well, what if their online homework takes more than 30 minutes a day?
I agree. I think when we do surveys of parents, screen time is typically one of the top concerns. And I'm hoping that maybe COVID and all this remote learning maybe has shifted some of that. I'm eager to survey what parents have to say again, because it's about the, quality and what you're doing. And I'm a big gamer myself, Justin. We play games together a lot, and it's been a great bonding experience with our tween. We actually run digital-parenting.com, and I have game reviews. I run a game review site if you want to get a perspective of a parent and a gamer on these games, and these been some great experiences. So I'm glad to hear you're a gamer as well.
I don't know if I consider myself a gamer, but no. I do probably 5 nights a week play Mario Kart online with my mother, my son's grandmother, and my sister, brother-in-law, and niece. So about 5 nights a week we play a couple of rounds and chat, and it's a very fun experience.
And gaming's kept us together through COVID when we couldn't see each other. It really kept those bonding there. So I appreciate that. Now I'll go quickly through this so I can make sure I have time for questions. We've discussed some of these things about combating bullying throughout this time period, about monitoring, some supervision. Some of this cyberbullying can happen simply from just lots of access and boredom. So if they have long unsupervised access, that's a risk factor. So keeping them busy and being very careful about shaming and how we talk about things, and encouraging tattling, for lack of a better word, or talking about them online, because they're highly cognizant of their outside factors and all the things their peers are doing. And as Jess and I were mentioning, thinking about when you were in adolescence, I told the embarrassing story of when I'm going through puberty and being teased about it. I never forgot that. Do you probably never forgot some of these instances that you've had when you were bullied? I mean, you've probably had a bullying experience. I know I have. You don't forget. And then how would you like to have had it differently? I would have maybe not liked to know how to respond better. I was just so shocked by some of the things doing. I just sat there, and then I spent, forever ruminating on what I could have said. Role playing or like working through some of this would have been helpful for me, but that could be different for you. I think putting ourselves in their shoes, doing our best to, is helpful for that empathy on our side of things. And being careful about not deleting the record. And this is hard. So we here in Utah, we work here and there with law enforcement, the Internet Crimes Against Children's task force, and they can't do their job without evidence. But so often, if we are in a cyberbullying or other kind of situation, we don't want to look at it. It feels uncomfortable. It makes us upset. So the automatic response can be to delete or hide or pretend it never happened. But that makes it harder for parents, school administrators, all of them to maybe get involved with that as well. They can't always intervene, and sometimes there is that space for intervening, and then there is that time where it needs to go up the chain to report to law enforcement. And so these are some times that kids should know when do I say something, and these are definitely. Even before this, I think, times to say something. But when it gets to threatening or stalking or all of these violating privacy, and then, of course, it can get into sexually explicit messages or child pornography. And they might not know what's legal, what's not legal, and what I should say, or they have intense feelings of shame around something of these behaviors, or they are being shamed by someone who's engaging in sextortion that they might not report or say anything. Right now, we only know 50% are reporting cyberbullying. What is the percentage reporting some of this? I know it's not 100%. So encouraging them that this is not tattling. This is, you are fine. You're not going to shame or none of this, but there are times that it needs to be reported, and it doesn't just need to be discussed. It needs to be reported, and young people should be aware of some of that. And this is some of the places that you can report. School districts often have their own hotlines and places and things to send, but if it gets to that level of like stalking, sexually explicit pictures of children, that's when it needs to take it up the chain. Way up the chain. So Human Trafficking Hotline, FBI's Internet Complaint Center, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. You can report as well to the social media platform and these sites. You don't have to pick one or the other, but these are things against the law as well. And our young tweens who are first starting to get their phones, they're starting to discover this digital ecosystem, might always not know what is legal, what is allowed, what is appropriate. They're learning about what is a healthy relationship. They're still figuring this out. And this is where some of that adult guidance can come in. So I want to get your thoughts on here as well, Dr. Patchin. We're going to wrap up this and move on to questions. This concept of norms and values. Now, this is a time of great transition. It's a liminal space, for lack of a better word, right? They got a lot of stuff being thrown at them, and it's a time of flux. So having those norms and values that are consistent at school and at home can really help them through this big transitional space. So I ask parents a lot about what are the norms that you're creating in your home. And we're not like, I'm creating a norm by doing this, but your habits and your routines are creating those norms? How are we modeling that behavior? What role models are we setting? Are we listening? All of these are some questions I think we can all do better, because we have to remember where they're at in their brain. Are we forgetting how they're operating? We're not necessarily the best friend anymore. We're not the best buddy, and we need to shift our roles and keep those norms and routines consistent. So do you have a norm or value in your home, Justin, or something that you do that helps with this, or your thoughts in general?
Yeah, I mean, we have to model the behaviors we want to see in our kids, right? And the one thing I struggle with, and I'm pretty intentional about, is just simple screen time myself, and not, staring at my phone all the time I'm hanging out with my son or my wife, and that's difficult, right? Mm-hmm. And so I try to put it away so that he doesn't. I mean, there are times where all three of us are sitting around, we're all staring at a screen. And so it's kind of hard for us to condemn his screen time if we're staring at screens as well. So we have to do the hard thing and model what we want to see. And not only that, but then how we communicate with each other. So I think there's a lot of things we as adults and parents and educators can do to encourage young people to behave in certain ways, even if we disagree with somebody. So disagreeing civilly, which seems to be difficult, if not impossible, these days.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, the modeling the behavior. What are the words we're using about things? And it's so sometimes hard as adults, to they're little kids to you. They're like, but they're kind of kids, but they're kind of teens. They're the tweens, right? And we have to kind of shift how we talk to them and shift our mindset a little bit. They're not, as a parent, that's hard. I'm like, weren't you 2 yesterday? I mean, I think, right? We forget that, but we're trying to prepare them for adulthood as well. We need to shift how we listen, how we talk, how we communicate with them as they grow too. So they grow up fast there. So we're going to wrap up and then move into questions. I know we have a lot of questions, and Joyce is going to look through those and start giving those out. I wanted to mention this is my book. It is out with Skyhorse Publishing in a few weeks. So I talk a lot about modeling behavior. That's one of the 3 M's of digital parenting. It's a big deal, and I have a whole big long chapter on tweens in here. And I have to say, Dr. Patchin was great, a great help. I got into his research for my last book, Becoming a Digital Parent, and I'm like, I have to interview this guy. So he's given some great cyberbullying advice in the book, and I have a whole section about you, and you're going to get a copy, don't worry. I'm going to send you a signed copy, Justin. So,
nice.
He has some great insights, and I highly recommend following his blog. He stays on top of trends and everything going on. So we'll pull the questions and comments and bring Joyce back in if she wants to share some of your questions. I know we had a bunch.
Absolutely. This is a very talkative group, and thank you all so much. Definitely, this is what makes it really interesting for everybody. So I'm going to try and get to some big ones. First one for you, Dr. Patchin. Briefly, can you just kind of outline the research in terms of when it was done and the sampling and the types of students and things like that? That was one question, just about the actual facts of that behind it.
Oh, I'm always happy to talk about the methodology, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Yeah, definitely check out the report. The link's been shared in the chat a couple of times, or if you do a search for Cartoon Network, cyberbullying, tweens, you're going to find it. But in short, it's probably the best research methods you can get. It's a probabilistic sample, nationally representative. I don't know if people are familiar with the research methods, but we used Ipsos, and so it's about as solid as you can get in terms of representativeness of the U.S. 9 to 12-year-olds all across the U.S. And it was done last May and June. So, but a lot more details in the report.
Perfect. That gives everybody kind of the framework for that. And I think just a couple of people missed it as we were going along. One of the center of many of the questions was around, well, when is a good time to introduce the first phone and or social media, in terms of, I think people are looking for like an age range or something. One person said something about she knew of a 3-year-old who had their first phone. So I chimed in and said, okay, 3 is too early. Developmentally, how do they even can click eye-hand coordination and things like that? But any guidelines, Carrie, maybe you have.
That's a big question I get when I teach parents, and there is not a hard and fast rule. But when I talk to parents, I talk about the developmental stages, and that peer influence is so strong that's why I try to, like, if we can get out of the danger peer influence zone a little bit more, don't I say? Because they're so influenced, and they're affected a bit more than maybe like a 15 or 16-year-old, that I try to push it more to a 13 and 14-year-old. But I do know that, I have children living in multiple homes, they're in sports, they're in activities, and sometimes that's a logistical issue to wait that long too. But I try to push, can we push it back closer to that 14 if you can? Let's get out of the danger zone.
Right. Totally. It is so hard to kind of give a simple answer, right? Some kids are just not ready for a while, and some kids more earlier. Have you felt the same thing, Dr. Patchin?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, again, going back to the research, almost 70% of 12-year-olds have their own smartphone. And I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. When I talk with parents, usually they give their child a phone when it's convenient for the parent more so than the kid. And, talked about this, maybe the after school activities or, whatever they need to have contact with their kids. But for me, I think my advice is that there is no hard and fast rule. It's not like 12. 12 is good, 10's not good, 14's too late. But I tend to err on the side of giving your child access to technology at ages that are a little younger than what your gut is telling you. Because the key here is that you want to have some influence in their early technological, explorations, right? So if you wait till they're 14, they're going to have a lot of friends that are on a lot of apps and a lot of sites. And so when they get that phone, they are very peer oriented at that point,
Right.
and they're going to get all their information from their friends. Whereas if you give it to them when they're maybe 11, maybe 10, I don't know. My kid's almost 12 and he doesn't have a phone yet. Then if you start at a relatively early age, they're going to be super pumped about it, and they're going to be super willing to listen to your rules at that age because they're still bonded to the parent. And again, developmentally, it's different for every kid. But if you get them when they're still bonded to you, you can put a lot of rules on that. We have a technology use contract on our website that parents can download as a framework for having these conversations. But if you wait too late, kids will find access to technology in one way or another. I've had many 13, 12-year-olds tell me that they get their friend's old device and the parents don't even know they have it. So you have to be careful how hard you push, because then you're going to be left out in terms of influencing their behaviors.
Yeah. When my daughter was 12-ish, I got her a phone, and she shared it with my mother, who was in her 80s. And they kind of went back and forth. Well, what do you need it for? I need it for when I'm going to soccer so that I can tell mom we're done and I need to be picked up, and things like that, back and forth, because my mother also needed to be picked up at places and she wasn't driving. So that was kind of a compromise. It lasted only a short period of time, but it got us all talking about the phone. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, like you were just entitled. Oh, you're going to get a phone. It was a thing that we needed to use for a reason, not just because. So got us talking about it a little bit more. So with that, because that was very specific to that time period, I think one of the most frequently asked questions here today was, in this year of the pandemic, has this really escalated? Has the amount of cyberbullying escalated? Have the problems escalated? What have you seen? Carrie, you want to hit that one?
Oh, yeah. And I think Justin can weigh in too. I mean, it's hard to measure. I've read conflicting and different reports about teen mental health, I've read different things. And I think that it also depends on when you measured that study, at what point in pandemic, and is it long-term? I think we're still going to be getting a lot of great research from this. I can say that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children did report a large increase in child sexual exploitation online, that they had a huge increase this last year with some of that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by those numbers, because more kids are online for a greater amount of time. And so, we do have research that speaks to that very question. I just can't discuss it yet. So we just got done. I'll just give you some generalities because we just got done collecting data weeks ago, and we haven't analyzed it yet. But the punchline is school bullying, as might be predicted, is way down during the pandemic. School bullying, because many kids weren't at school. And cyberbullying certainly did not increase during the pandemic and probably decreased for most kids. That said, when we compare our 2019 teen data to our 2021 teen data, the numbers did go up. Did they go up because of the pandemic? When you ask teens, has it gotten worse during the pandemic? For the most part, they say no. So, but there's going to be more research. We'll be publishing some stuff in the next couple months on that. But generally, it hasn't gotten a lot worse, which is a little bit surprising. But the point is, we know from other research that online bullying is related to at-school bullying. And so if the stuff isn't happening at school, it's not happening online. It's a relationship issue, really.
One of those silver linings from the pandemic and all the closures has been the increased amount of parental involvement. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that had something to do with it, because, parents are really involved in early childhood and elementary. And then towards the tweens and middle school, it goes, and then by high school, it's kind of, and usually it's because the kids are pushing you away. But this year, they couldn't push you away.
They're getting more sleep too. They're getting more sleep in our family time, so that affects.
We're talking about modeling, and that's like such an important thing. And I think it can also be, the type of thing where if you're expressing as an adult saying, I need to unplug, I'm taking a mental health break, I'm going to go for a walk to the park, and I'm only going to have my phone on me for emergencies, like in case something were to happen, but I'm not using it. Things like that, I think, can really help. I also know that sometimes the tweens go to bed with their phone, and then it's like at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're getting, messages. So it's like, okay, you're going to bed, no phone. Phones go off. That, so there should be not at dinner time. Those types of simple rules that you could do yourself. And that would help the kids. Are there other kind of modeling thoughts that you have in your book, Carrie, that you haven't covered yet? I think you covered a lot.
Well, like Justin was saying about, maybe doing it earlier than later. And, you got to weigh where they are developmentally. And there's a prime time of that going on, and every kid's different. But I encourage parents to, and this is not always the most popular advice I give at parenting classes, to create the social media accounts with them. To actually go through the settings, make sure things are in private or how the chats are and all of it. And like he was saying, if you do that a little younger, they're more open to creating the accounts with them. And that is a great digital literacy lesson on how that all works too. The tweens make their social media accounts. Yeah. Maybe it might be sooner than you want to, though.
It was so funny on the chat when they were talking about all the different apps and so forth. And I said, what about Snapchat? They said, oh, that's already out. That's already not cool anymore. I'm like, I can't keep track of what's cool anymore and what's not, but you have to, right? My kids are up, they're no tweens. So we're at a point where they teach me. So, all right. So final thoughts or questions or something that you want to, leave everybody with, just a nugget.
I joke with parents. I say, hey, you're not the cool parent anymore. You might just be the mean parent, and just embrace it. And they'll come back maybe at age 30. but it's not as important to be their friend as to be their parent. And they might be distancing themselves and rolling their eyes at you. That's normal, but you have a lot to offer. You have a lot to offer as an educator. You have wisdom and experience, and you can be a great mentor. You're maybe not their friend, but you can be a great mentor, and it's a good opportunity to be there.
Absolutely.
I would echo the same, and just be there for them. I mean, be supportive. Remember what it was like to be a tween, an adolescent. It was no fun. It's not a fun time. And so they need to have somebody in their corner, and that's you, right? Whether you're a parent or an educator, if you're on this webinar, if you're paying attention, that's you. So be there for them, be that resource, help them get through these things. If you're interested in some of my other research, definitely cyberbullying.org. We got stuff on teens and older youth as well. Resources for parents, educators. Definitely check it out.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. The slides are going to be shared. You can see all the references and all the points that we have for you here. I just want to thank both Carrie and Justin. This was really so interesting. I wrote pages of notes because it's an ongoing topic. You can't let this go. It does change every day. So thank you both very much. Thank you all for attending. So many people in July, on the 13th of July. So thanks to EdWeb for hosting us. Much appreciated.